Welcome to The Corner, LaSource's digital show dedicated to the sport and entertainment industry. Every 2 weeks, we invite a professional to share their experience, background, and challenges. The sport industry moves fast, and having their insights is the best way to keep up to speed. Welcome to The Corner.
Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Le Corner. I'm Leander, managing partner at LaSource, and today I'm joined by someone at the intersection of investment, innovation, and media in one of the emerging markets in the Middle East. Mohsen Garcia is the co-founder of 1001, an OTT platform based in Iraq that is reshaping how local audiences access entertainment in live sports. Mohsen, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Leander. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So let's start straight away and dive into it. Let's explore maybe your background and your personal journey behind 1001. You've moved from private equity and finance into tech and media. Can you maybe walk us through that transition, if you?
Yeah, of course. I guess in some respects the transition is actually even greater in the sense that I spent most of my career on the commercial and investment side of a very different industry to tech and media, the energy industry. I actually started my career with Shell, obviously one of the world's biggest oil and gas companies. And after a few years there and doing an MBA, I transitioned initially into renewable energy. And did that for a few more years and continued to have kind of a couple of areas of activities where I still support and advise on renewable energy projects and private equity investments in that industry in general. But tech and media obviously is very different to the world of energy and to the world of private equity investments, notwithstanding that there's always some overlap, I guess, between some of the concepts that you pick up, some of the business concepts, some of the finance concepts, some of the investment concepts, and what you ultimately are trying to achieve through what in this case is a media venture in a very interesting but also challenging market. I think the main trigger that gave me the confidence and the understanding of what is obviously a very different world was when I spent a couple of years out of my day job, having already kind of spent several years at Shell, running around doing different jobs in different parts of the world, and I spent a couple of years at London Business School doing my MBA. And I think the biggest value of that wasn't necessarily in the learning, because you could probably pick up the concepts online and through various other courses. And frankly, I think I spent a bit too much time messing around or not focusing in class. The main kind of value was, at least for me, was just kind of changing my mindset about what I could do and opening myself up to new opportunities. And obviously, I'm sure we'll dive into it more during this conversation, but it's not that I necessarily wanted to do something in tech and media, it's that I wanted to do something different, explore something different. And I saw an opportunity which initially built on the back of my heritage and a country that I felt was ripe for these kind of opportunities. And it was that change of mindset that I achieved when I was out of my day-to-day working environment, sitting in the MBA with lots of interesting people with these kind of backgrounds who'd done this kind of thing in other places, that made me, or at least gave me the confidence and perhaps also infused me with the passion to go and do something like this. So it wasn't that I want to do something in tech and media, so that's the opportunity that I saw on the back of this changing mindset mentality that I was able to develop. So that was probably the strongest driver behind what eventually happened.
And you talked about the opportunity that you identified. The opportunity was launching a streaming platform, right, in Iraq. Why or what exactly was the opportunity that you identified?
So this kind of started to materialize back in 2017 2018, as I was coming to the end of my MBA. But I felt at that point in time that it was perhaps a little too early. And I started exploring a couple of other opportunities within the same context. So, to put the things in perspective, my father is Iraqi. I have Iraqi heritage. I have a Spanish mother. I grew up in the UK, so I've got kind of a mix of cultures, and I've lived and worked across these different kind of regions. But at the back of my mind, I always saw Iraq as this very interesting emerging market. Obviously, decades of war and instability. And back in 2017, 2018, when I started to actively explore these ideas, Iraq was only just coming out of, a multi-year war with ISIS and with other similar kind of militia remnants. So it wasn't a very good time, even though obviously, as we now have learned, it was the beginning of a much better period for the country. So I initially looked at a couple of other industries. I actually started looking at the possibility, because I had that background. I started looking at, setting up a renewable energy business or some sort of, provision of solar and similar components into a market that was obviously thirsty for power, and renewables was a natural solution to satisfy that thirst. And I dabbled in that for a little bit whilst I continued to work in renewable energy development and kind of investments and private equity in that particular industry. But I had always thought there's something bigger, there's something that can probably satisfy millions of households, and content, the provision of content is something that, again, is also very emotional. It's something that people really relate to. At the end of the day, everybody has their favorite series, their favorite movies, and especially when you're able to potentially provide that in a way that is easy to engage with, you've got something that is super scalable very quickly. And we've seen how that's worked out with some of the more successful streaming or video platforms around the world. So as time went on and as this market started to open up and mature and evolve, it became apparent to me that there is a massive gap in the provision of video streaming content, legally, of course, because that's another big challenge in our industry. Piracy is one of the main facilitators of content wherever you are in the world. So legally, to Iraqi households who, up until that point, much like many other more traditional markets, were avid consumers of content, but had done so through more traditional means. And we've seen how streaming as a culture has disrupted media consumption, content consumption around the world. So that disruption hadn't yet happened in Iraq. And we're already starting to see successful disruption of other industry verticals in Iraq that were just mimicking what we already knew was inevitably going to happen, because it happened in pretty much every other more mature market around the world, like ride hailing or food delivery or e-commerce. And these were already entering en masse into the market. So, I kind of started to see this as the niche that I could potentially go into. I was fortunate enough that, and I'm sure this also played an important role in my thinking, I was advising one of Iraq's biggest media groups at that point in time on kind of completely separate matters, just strategy, investments. I kind of modeled myself as a sort of, kind of financial advisor. I had some of that kind of experience and background. And, that probably gave me some, something to kind of justify, supporting the business on those fronts. But that then naturally lent itself for, well, you know what, there's a gap here. You guys aren't really filling it, but you can be very useful to that effort because you have a massive content library. You have a large audience base already consuming your channels and your content through traditional means. We know this market is ripe for disruption. Why don't we offer them an alternative, or we complement what you're able to offer through this other distribution channel by basically tapping into digital streaming? And that obviously went down quite well and kind of set in motion the subsequent steps that we took.
Yeah, amazing. It's I knew it already from before, but I think it's quite amazing how both from a cultural perspective and professional experience perspective, you have these like different angles. And I think obviously throughout your career, that is something that is makes you personally and professionally richer. So it's quite amazing to see. So yeah, I understand that at a certain point you saw that opportunity, you had that background investment, but also the media connections that you had. How did you then really move forward with the idea and crystallize the idea into something that was a new venture for you? And also tell us a little bit about the vision of 1001, why the name 1001, but beyond that as well, what is the kind of longer term vision that you wanted to follow?
I'll start with the second part first, because I think it's sets in stone, kind of an interesting story. Sets how we kind of started thinking about this. So 1001, firstly, as a name, it may trigger, if it hasn't already, it may trigger some connection to 1001 Nights or 1001 Arabian Nights, which are a series of stories that kind of came out of Iraq. A lot of people think it came from the region. Yes, it did come from the region, but Iraq is actually the source of those stories. The actual land of Iraq is the source of those stories. And those, spread really far and wide through the rest of the region and the rest of the world. So, it's one of those things that I think makes us instantly relatable to pretty much anybody, whether they're in Iraq or in the region or around the world. And that's how we perceived ourselves. We kind of saw ourselves as a bridge between cultures and between peoples, because ultimately content bridges cultures and people. In Iraq, they're avid consumers of the Spanish Football League, which we'll talk about more later, I'm sure, or the Premier League and the Champions. They love football. They love international football. They love Hollywood movies. They love Turkish series. They love South Korean dramas. So 1001 is, and at the same time, we, through our strategic partnerships, we're putting together the biggest library of Iraqi Arabic content, not just Arabic content, because a lot of people treat the region with one lens, and there's some fairness to that, but the reality is there are cultural and dialectal differences between Arabic-speaking countries that are greater than what we even see in Latin America. So it's not really just one region; it's multiple countries with very different preferences, including content which reflects those emotional differences at its heart. And that also means that we have the biggest library of Iraqi Arabic content through the strategic partnerships, that in future we saw ourselves as a provider of Iraqi Arabic content to the rest of the world. So that's the concept, that's the bridge, and frankly that's also the vision, because ultimately we wanted to provide a content universe to our Iraqi audience that we were focused on, but over the longer term provide an Iraqi content universe to a global audience. And that probably starts with the Iraqi diaspora, which is quite numerous in numbers in the millions in places like the UK or the US. And I'm kind of an example of that diaspora. But also in the longer term, we've seen the success of South Korean, Turkish, more recently even Jordanian, Lebanese content. There's no reason why Iraqi content can't contribute to the global offering of content that exists, right? So that's something I think we see as part of the longer term vision. Now, coming back to kind of how it evolved and how we moved forward. I mean, initially, we actually conceived of this as, okay, there's a big incumbent TV group that is backing us strategically as an investor in this project. The natural thing would be, okay, well, let's just take their existing brand, put a plus on it, and here you go, streaming platform, right? But and frankly, we actually even branded it that way in our sort of initial working materials, as we were kind of planning this project and trying to get stakeholders on board and potential other investors. When you're kind of putting together an idea. But what we realized quite quickly was that if we took that approach, it was going to create limitations around our ability to grow and our ability to actually, because this is as much a venture as it was an idea to transform a market. It's not the biggest market in the world, but it's a very significant market, 45 million people. It's not a poor country either. It's actually a middle income country, $100+ billion per year just in oil and gas revenues. So this is a sizable economy. And it's a place that consumes a lot of things. It's a consumer-centric economy. People like to spend. They like to enjoy themselves in Iraq. So, in many respects, we have to consider what they have an appetite for. And it was clear that, yes, they have an appetite for the content that our strategic partner was infusing us with, but actually they don't want to just watch that. Iraqis look to watch everything, as I was saying earlier. They love, avid football fans. They love Western series. They love Turkish. They love to consume the world. So with that in mind, we were going to create limitations around ourselves if we presented ourselves as the streaming platform of this existing media group with their existing content. We had to be more than that if we were going to genuinely shift this market in favor of not only streaming in general, but legal streaming in particular. And that's why not only did we brand it as 1001, we conceived of the idea that over time, we had to aggregate more content. We had to use the strategic partner who had the biggest library of Iraqi Arabic content. That was our foundation. That was our competitive advantage, because obviously no one else had access to that. And it was a very popular foundational set of content. And they were refreshing that every year, every Ramadan in particular, which is a very important time of the year in Arabic countries for consuming content, like Christmas in Europe. Every Ramadan, you've got all the new series coming out. These guys, Al Sharqiyya Group, who were the kind of strategic partners, and they had their own TV channels, they were going to be continuing to produce all this fantastic content. We were going to be the exclusive home of that content on streaming. But over time, that wasn't going to be enough to really shift the market in favor of what we were trying to do, in favor of legal streaming, especially if eventually we wanted to start charging a subscription to be able to monetize. So we had to aggregate more content to satisfy what we knew were user and audience demands. And that obviously set in stone the subsequent phases of the platform after we launched it publicly in March of 2023. We started publicly very first day with that massive, but still only local library. And I mean, that brought in millions of people within a few weeks. So it was very impressive what it could do. But it doesn't keep them there forever, because eventually they're going to find that after Ramadan is over, after they're satisfied with seeing the latest Iraqi Arabic drama that everyone's been talking about at home, they're going to want to go back to watching a new season of Succession or The Last of Us or the next football game that Real Madrid or Barcelona play. And that's going to be somewhere else. And ironically, at that point, not on streaming in Iraq, not at least in a mainstream capacity, and certainly not in a legal capacity. So that was part of the next phase of building out the proposition.
And was that an easy discussion to have with your partners? The fact that you were having that longer term vision around building your own content library, I'd say independent from your partner, and kind of additionally cater to the audiences through the streaming platform? Is that an easy kind of conversation to have?
It's an interesting question, because I don't recall any particular moment where we had a showdown about this in any way. It kind of just evolved naturally. And what we found happened was, as we went through the phase of pre-launch, preparing everything, to actually launching it, to then subsequently, looking at adding more content, and eventually successfully aggregating the first one or two new media platform partners who came on board with their content libraries and offerings. There was a lot of evolution rather than revolution. There wasn't a particular moment where it was, this is an issue for us. What was clear was that we knew we were going into an uncertain world, right? Like any startup, you don't know entirely what to expect. You can only plan to a certain degree. And so what we did have was an understanding that this is something that's going to evolve. We may have to pivot, we may have to adapt. And there was always a support in terms of, adapting our structure to reflect that. So for example, in the early days, we were much more closely associated with that strategic partner than we have been since then, purely because in the early days, not only were they our main backer and investor, but they were also our main content provider. Now it's not the case. Now we're much more diversified across multiple content platforms and partners, and that's exactly where we wanted to end up. And so in some respects, I think our first strategic partner, who also are an investor, and so they have a shared incentive in terms of our success at the shareholding level. They ultimately understood that if we wanted to succeed and they wanted to actually derive long-term value from their early involvement in this venture, the best way to do that would be by adding more content offerings that spoke to what people wanted in the market. And obviously in the longer term, hopefully allows us to create a very sustainable and profitable business. So that is to their benefit, and they've recognized that, right? But as I said, it was very much an evolution, just responding step by step to the realities of the market. If we took the early days of the venture, it could have easily assumed that, we don't need anybody else. Sharqiya and this kind of Iraqi Arabic content library that we're launching with is more than enough. Millions of people coming in to watch this stuff. So that's a validation that content works. But there's only so much of that content to go around, and people culturally tend to consume it at different times of the year. We may be able to change that culture over time or adapt it, but we also have to respond to the realities on the ground. And I think that's what we did.
Yeah, very clear. You refer to the kind of move towards a subscription model, right? You started as an AVOD model, kind of shifted towards what I think is more of a hybrid one. Can you explain us a little bit more what the current business model is, and whether that was always the plan, whether it was a natural kind of evolution, or did the market kind of lead you the way?
So it was a bit of both. But I think when we started out, we always knew that longer term, we were going to have to monetize at some point. The ad market in Iraq in particular, but also regionally, in my personal opinion, is not yet mature enough for digital streaming offerings. There's obviously a lot of spend that goes towards the social media giants. But again, it's not necessarily sustainable, and it doesn't reflect the real value of the markets. And so I think, that will need to change over time. Perhaps the way that happens is obviously the industry matures, there's better offerings in Iraq and the rest of the region. There are alternatives to just the social media giants. And so, especially as viewership shifts away from satellite, free-to-air satellite TV to digital streaming, which it is and will only accelerate in the coming years, I think all of that will serve to reinforce and improve the CPMs, and the costs that or the revenues that you can generate from selling ads. But if you're going to try and offer any sort of premium content, as things stand, subscriptions are the only way to be able to do that. And so we always knew that sooner or later we were gonna have to launch a subscription product, and obviously try to use that to be able to make a return on our investments and our offering. The challenge is, ironically, we also happen to be in a market where not only is ad spend, not high enough, but subscription spend is also inexistent. But that was also the opportunity. So subscriptions, the culture of subscriptions in Iraq, we were probably one of the very first, if not one of the main proponents of a subscription giving you something. You get something in return for a sub. The likes of ride-hailing, e-commerce, these other digital apps and services that had started to enter the Iraqi market. And we had some serious kind of brands and players doing that. Careem, who were, I think, acquired by Uber, came into the Iraqi market a few years ago. Talabat, one of the world's biggest food delivery players, also entered the market a couple of years back. There was a couple of other ventures that are backed by pretty big investment funds who also came in. So they were all there and they were doing quite well, but none of them were offering a subscription product, which we're much more used to in more mature markets. So I think we were one of the first. And I'm not saying, the market is still evolving and it's shifting. I wouldn't say it's fully shifted en masse to, accepting and engaging with a subscription, but it's certainly come a very long way in the last 2 years. And I'd like to think that we've played an important role in achieving that. And that's in the mutual interest of any provider of a digital product or service, because obviously it's at the heart of creating sustainable revenue streams for you and for your product. And at the same time, it offers a lot of value, obviously, if you actually do consume that product on a regular basis, right? We all know how effective the streaming subscription offering has been in Europe and North America. Like, it led to people en masse leaving cable and leaving free-to-air television, because all of a sudden you had so much more choice for a very relatively reasonable amount per month. Not that obviously we have, multiple streaming platforms now, and that's creating a bit of a challenge, but actually we're also trying to resolve that with 1001. So I think, we've gone through an evolution where subscriptions are necessary, but we also recognized that when we launched our subscription product a year after we launched the platform, we still need to be able to provide a decent amount of content for those who cannot afford or who are still dabbling with the idea of a subscription, and they need to build confidence and trust in the product. You can't operate in a market where people are literally just now learning about subs and learning about paying for content legally, and you kind of just stick a paywall in front of it and expect them to engage with that. You have to give them a taste, you have to let them experience it. And so by having this hybrid model where we offer some free content, we effectively have a funnel where you can come in, you can try certain things. There are times when, for example, we actually go all out and we allow wider access to our content on a free basis. We did that in Ramadan recently with some of our exclusives. And that allows people, not only to create that buzz and experience and understanding of our product, but in the longer run, we believe that it's a way to facilitate, it's a freemium model in some respects. It's a way to facilitate people converting to paid subscriptions. So we think that the hybrid model is absolutely necessary. And in the longer run, as the ad market starts to mature, then we're already well placed to make the most of that and offer value to advertisers and sponsors who want to also showcase their brands within our content. And I think that relationship is a very powerful one when it's done correctly.
Yeah, and then I guess that's a continuous kind of testing game as well, in terms of putting some content behind paywall and others, and giving them access at a certain point to, whether it's sports content or anything else, to try and drive them towards your subscriptions in the end. So very interesting. You've alluded to the Iraqi market, right? I think it's a market that unfortunately not a lot of people maybe know that well. I guess it's definitely something, and I can see it from the conversations that we're having more and more, is it's seen as an emerging market, but it also has its challenges, right? You've alluded to the well, it's a worldwide phenomenon of piracy, but I think in the region it's definitely one of the biggest challenges that you're facing. This and others, like, can you tell us a little bit more about those early challenges that you're facing, or the challenges that you're still facing, piracy, but maybe also others like infrastructure and regulations? It's a big topic, but
yeah, no, absolutely it is. So I mean, look, let me start with what I think is ironically the easier side of the equation, which is, a market like Iraq. If you don't really know it very well, you might imagine some of the more challenging places in Africa, for example, where you kind of associate the history of conflict that occurred there with also dilapidated infrastructure and lack of access. That's not the case, and it's certainly improved even more so in the last 3-4 years. But even relatively speaking, wasn't the case historically. So you actually now have a market where, as of the last 2-3 years, which aligned quite nicely with when we launched, 4G connectivity is super widespread. I think it's in the 90s percentage-wise in terms of coverage across the country. A fiber optic rollout is well underway right now across the country, with millions of households now connected to FTTH, fiber to the home lines, which essentially means that average internet speeds are north of 30-40 megabits per second, which essentially means that you've got more than enough bandwidth now to be able to do pretty much everything that you should be able to do on the internet as per our kind of usual norms around the world. You kind of combine that with some of the stats coming out of the country. I mean, it's a very youthful population, but it's also not a poor population. So the result of that is you've got a very connected and very active country when it comes to digital content consumption. So forget about us as more traditional streaming offerings. Iraq is a top 10 market for TikTok, and I think it's also a top 10 market for YouTube in terms of number of users. So it's massive. people are used to consuming digital content, video content in particular. They consume it on mobile, they consume it at home. You know, the connectivity and the usage and the culture of consuming content is there. So, you know, that sets in stone, I think, the positive side of the market. Those are not limitations. If they were, then it would be much more challenging to do what we're trying to do. Where we have a massive issue in Iraq, it's a global problem, but it exists even more so in Iraq. In fact, it probably exists to the extent of Iraq being one of the world's worst markets in this regard is piracy. So piracy is a recognized issue. I think, you know, at some point or another, everybody's watched some pirated content. I think that's something that we can pretend or deny. It's an inherent part of culture. The difference, I think, is that as markets evolved and matured, and, you know, we saw how things evolved quite quickly on the music streaming side when Spotify came on board and really revolutionized how people consumed music. We've seen very similar, but slightly more fragmented, but broadly similar trends on the video streaming side, where you may not have a single provider of all content like Spotify does for music, but you do have essentially multiple platforms that are largely, especially Netflix, the most prominent example, quite easy to use, quite enjoyable to use, and have helped to convince a lot of people, listen, like, why am I kind of wasting my time trying to find this content illegally? I'll just pay $5, $6, $7, $10, pounds, euros a month, and I pretty much get everything I want, more than I can ever consume in my free time. And that's kind of resolved the mainstream piracy issue to some extent. Piracy still exists. People are still trying to find illegal matches to watch online, but it's just so much easier to do it legally. In Iraq, the core problem is that people have gotten used to in recent years consuming content like the same stuff that we are able to show as us as a streaming platform, as Netflix might show in other markets, this kind of premium movie series from around the world, premium sports, but they consume it digitally, but they consume it through piracy platforms. And these platforms are literally apps and websites that replicate the legal streaming experience because it puts it all in one place. You have search bars, you know, you've got information on the title, you've got integrations with IMDb, you can even comment and like actually very, very, from a product perspective, really powerful products. And they're extra powerful because they put everything in one place. Because part of the issue with content is you have to go through multiple different streaming platforms to be able to find what you want. And these guys kind of aggregate it all in one place. These platforms are super widespread in Iraq. Millions of households are using it. And the main proponents of them are the internet service providers in Iraq, the licensed internet service providers. So the result of that is when you've got a licensed ISP who is responsible for providing you with your internet connection, and you pay them every month for that privilege, which should be just your internet, like your connection, and you pay them $30, $40, $50 a month. But as part of their value to you, as part of their services to you, they also give you access to their proprietary or sponsored streaming platforms, which has everything under the sun in a single kind of place. Then the incentive to go and pay for legal content, even if it's, you know, shouting in your face, I'm here, come use my product, is dramatically reduced. And it's very difficult for a legal streaming service to replicate that user experience of unifying all the content in one place, let alone obviously provide it to you for free or as part of an existing service that you're going to pay for anyway, just like you pay for your water and your electricity, you're going to pay for your internet. So that, I think, has created a very entrenched piracy market in Iraq. And it's quite well known. It's an issue that, you know, is fairly well understood on the streets, but obviously it's difficult to also convince people, listen, like, it's difficult to see the connection between that piracy platform that you're using and the creative community locally, regionally, or internationally, especially locally, because obviously that's more relatable, who are never really paid properly or who are losing a lot of money, value, resource, opportunity as a result of this activity where millions of households are basically getting all of this content without contributing directly for it, let alone those who provide that content to them are not contributing for it. So that is what we're up against. And ironically, we launched this venture in that environment. So we knew about it. I don't know if we were foolish or not. I think time will tell. But ultimately, at its core, we knew that we had to try and shift this industry to be able to create a sustainable business model for content, for illegal content in Iraq. And I'm sure that, there are examples around the rest of the world where maybe, we can hopefully one day take a success story and apply it elsewhere. But yeah, that's certainly the biggest challenge that we're up against by far.
Yeah, and it's it's very right what you said in terms of the product, right? The streaming product itself has evolved on its end as well, quite a lot. And I think what is now becoming more of a discussion point in sports media as well is the kind of symptom versus cause, right? Piracy is more a symptom of a problem, and is not the root cause of the issues that we're currently facing. I think you've alluded to it: the product fragmentation of content, consumer fatigue, all these kind of things that are actually leading people towards pirated materials, and you're kind of combating that with a high end premium product, plus with, as you said, lots of content localized to the market. So I guess
Correct.
what you're doing is quite impressive and can be something that will be looked at from other markets, because it might be a big issue in Iraq, but it's certainly one that is widespread across different regions, and it's becoming more of an issue every day in Europe as well, and in other regions across the world. So it's a really interesting use case, and I understand the challenge that you're facing as well. But then it leads us a little bit to your strategy too. I think in terms of aggregating as much content as possible, you do have a strong partnership approach, I feel. The region media landscape is fragmented, with major players kind of expanding in the region, but 1001 has several strong partnerships, innovative partnerships, I'd say, with beIN's Todd, with StarzPlay. I think I know the answer, but can you elaborate a little bit more on what the strategy and the vision is behind those alliances?
So I think that's an area where we're very unique, and we're actually trying to innovate a lot of the product and the tech that sits behind our platform to further reinforce and support that approach, because we kind of faced no choice. If we, as an industry, let alone 1001, didn't offer a product, an ecosystem, a solution that aggregated as much as possible the key components of content that people wanted to consume throughout the year, then we would have failed to provide a clear, easy to understand legal alternative to the piracy platforms that I mentioned earlier, that incidentally from a user experience are actually superior to legal content consumption. So you can't bash something that is so ingrained in the culture of content consumption in that market, and then say, yeah, and now you have to go and subscribe to 5 different platforms. Not only is that going to cost you a hell of a lot more, it also means that you have to go through 5 separate subscription processes. Each one of these platforms is, not necessarily tailored for your market. So forget about like culture and emotions and language and dialects. Think about even things like payment solutions, where one platform might have done a bit more homework on the ground and more effort to kind of integrate itself with local payment solutions beyond necessarily just credit debit cards. Like there are digital payment solutions, there are digital wallets, there are mobile phone and telco integrations, direct carrier billing. There are vouchers that are distributed through very specific types of kiosks and shops. There's cash on delivery payments that exist. So all of these things that may make you much more accessible, that may not exist in large part or at all in some of these platforms. And so, you're basically saying you can't access this content, but that content's emotional. People need to be able to watch that next game. People need to be able to watch that new season of the new series that they love to see from Turkey or the Arab world or anywhere else. you're not facilitating it for them in an easy manner. So you're only holding back the transition that you're trying to encourage. So what we realized very quickly is the only way to resolve this is through aggregation. And so creating shared interests and shared success with some of the biggest platforms in the region, who in turn hold some of the most important exclusive rights across sports and entertainment. Combine that obviously with the foundation that we have that they can't have, which is our exclusive local library, which is a massive pull factor for people coming into the platform. And then add to that, of course, the localization of our product so that it speaks to the people we're trying to bring on board, both emotionally, but also through just reducing the frictions that they have to get through to be able to ultimately pay for our product or pay local partners who pay us for that product. And that, I think, is at the core of the aggregation strategy, is that we're bringing everyone together in the single tent because it's the only way to present a viable alternative. And then, of course, over time, as you evolve this, you start to create things that actually become quite interesting, quite useful, even outside of the Iraqi context. When you think about, for example, the ability to discover content from multiple platforms within a single platform, the ability to pay for your subscription from multiple platforms within a single platform, sometimes combined into a single package that obviously delivers even more value to the user and makes them more encouraged to subscribe to in the first place. And various other things that, you know, we're iterating and improving to really unify that experience between our app and other partner apps who are selling their product, their apps with us. So that, I think, over time, in fact, may even serve to resolve some of the challenges that we're seeing in more mature markets where, you know, we used to have cord cutting and now we've got kind of streaming churn. Like, people are also getting tired of sticking around in one single platform that may not give them all that they want. And so people are jumping between platforms. It's much more sustainable for all platforms if they're more accessible from within a single offering. Then, of course, people stay on because they've always got a bit of what they want in any particular point in time, aside from no friction around content discovery and payment, which I think is a very important component. So that is at the core of why we did it. And I think it was, you know, Iraq was a market ripe for that sort of innovation. It had to happen. Otherwise, there was no viable way forward.
But the thing is, I think generally, again, it is taking a local approach, local strategy, but it's definitely also something that is relevant for any other region within, whether it's sports media or just media. It is looking for that more ecosystem-based partnership approach. I think this is the way forward, and we see it, and that's the interesting. We see some big tech players trying to push to be that aggregator. Everybody's going in that direction, but it's really interesting to see a startup approach to this, right? And this is, you're now doing it on a local market, but again, it's very relevant, really nice to see. Let's move on maybe to another kind of milestone, one where we were kind of lucky to advise you on, the acquisition of LaLiga rights for 1001. This was, again, quite innovative and unique. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that deal came together?
So it was actually a pretty unexpected opportunity that materialized. And in many respects, I think we were just in the right place at the right time. But obviously, we had developed, I think, some early trust through some early wins in our home market, right? So when we launched, we were able to reach millions of users in a very short space of time, which kind of validated, okay, you know, there's something here, there's something for us to work with here. Shortly after that early launch, we were introduced to the representatives of the Spanish Football League who were operating in the MENA region. And in my personal case, you know, I'm a big Madrid fan. I grew up with a Spanish mother. I had a lot of, spent a lot of time with my family in Spain. So, you know, I was always passionate about the Spanish Football League and about the teams. And I always actually saw it as a bit of a bridge to my other half, time that I spent in Iraq. And I would always get asked when people found out that I had a Spanish mother, okay, what team do you support? Or we're Madrid, we're Barcelona. People are obsessed with these two teams in particular, and their rivalry in the Spanish Football League. So I always knew that there was something that something to do in that space, but I also didn't believe that we were necessarily going to be able to do something, because the rights for that league had sat, and I would have expected continue to sit, with one of the region's biggest media conglomerates, obviously backed by an important country in the region. And that essentially meant that for us, as a relatively recent entrant into one market in that region, would not really ever have the opportunity to do something there. But when I had those early conversations, and we connected through our mutual love of Spanish football, I think it transpired quite quickly that there could be a window of opportunity, because incidentally, the Spanish Football League saw Iraq as a very strategic market for them. They'd actually identified it as a top 5 market globally in terms of fan following and engagement. And they had the data to back that up. And actually, we did our own research, and we were able to reinforce that as well. We saw that that was really the case. But it was one of the markets that had probably the least monetization in the preceding years, because of piracy, primarily, and the entrenched piracy that we talked about earlier. So what we sought to do was, okay, maybe there's something we can do here by working together. And kind of find a commercial model that allows us to potentially take on these rights, which are not cheap. They're not easy to come by normally. They're a very premium product. They go for a lot of money. Even regionally, they were being sold for hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But at the same time, obviously, create a lot more value for us and for the Spanish Football League and for other legal content partners in future. So, we put together a plan. I think you were an integral part of that, Leander. I mean, we worked together at the time on the contracting. Obviously, we had to look at getting some partners on board and some investment to facilitate what otherwise would have been a very challenging deal. So we had to kind of work together with others. But ultimately, the core crux of it was bringing the Spanish Football League to Iraqis in a very direct way, through local studios, through local commentary and analysis. Iraqis hearing from their favorite pundits who happen to be Iraqi, rather than necessarily hearing from, an Egyptian guy or a Saudi guy who they also would like to hear from, but it just doesn't speak the same to them, especially when they're sitting in a studio quite far away from them. So all of that kind of localization that we really wanted to make the most of, being a local platform ourselves, combined with these rights and these matches that people are super passionate about in the first place, and with a kind of clear vision to supporting the transition of the market towards legal content that sat at its core. I think that is what convinced obviously the Spanish Football League to work with us, and the rest, as they say, is history. We're able eventually, of course, after a long period of contracts and lawyers and partnerships and investors all coming together, we're able to. I'm very proud that we're able to pull it off. And that product, LaLiga TV, we call it in Iraq, LaLiga Iraq, that's now available and watched by hundreds of thousands of people every month. And I think that's already a very, very good start. We have a lot that we want to do with it. We want to evolve it. We want to create more local content that kind of fits around the LaLiga vision. But ultimately, in the longer run, the core is, kind of making sure that all of these avid fans can engage more directly with the Spanish Football League and with their teams. And I think we are the conduit to achieving that. So that's how that particular story went.
Yeah, and I mean, you said it was right timing. Obviously, it was, but I can also say that from the conversations that we've had, the conversations with La Liga, that it's more than that, right? It's really the on the one hand, I think La Liga being one of the most advanced leagues in terms of understanding and wanting to understand their audience, not just in the big markets, but also looking at those emerging markets. So exactly what you said,
Right.
they've had identified Iraq themselves. I wonder, and this is a bit from our work for sports organizations, how many would be capable of doing that. Just in terms of understanding their audiences in dark markets, there's not that many. And I think that speaks to their kind of maturity as an organization. It's also their fierce fight against piracy. I think that is something where Javier Tebas is obviously very, very active. And I think, again, that narrative resonated with him. And then beyond, I think you and the story that you're telling is such a innovative story that kind of convinced him to take a different approach than many other leagues in that region, right? Everybody's selling the rights on a regional basis. This way, kind of focusing most on the revenue, direct revenue. However, as you say, there's many countries that are not, or audiences that are not being catered to by those bigger broadcasters. So I think that's a bit where they saw that opportunity, and it speaks to, I think, both parties' maturity and an innovative approach. So it's really was a hell of a ride to be part of, but I think it's a great achievement. I know we're running a bit out of time. I could speak for a long time. Maybe just to wrap it up, one look into the future on your end, both from the sports strategy, but also just as a platform where you're headed. Because I know, as you said, when it comes to the sports strategy, this was maybe an opportunistic kind of move at the time, and sports was an enabler more than the core product that 1001 is offering. How do you see that moving forward? And then just broader as a platform, where you headed, is this a purely Iraqi platform that you're building, or is it something that you see as more scalable across over the next couple of years?
So I think on the first part of that question, in terms of the overall strategy, I mean, in all honesty, I think those who kind of espouse 5-year plans and pretend that they've got it all under control, I think are probably lying to themselves. We don't know what the future holds. What we know is that, at least in the near term, there's a wonderful opportunity that I think we're doing a relatively good job of capitalizing on, which is presenting a viable legal alternative to users and encouraging them to come on board and start using that product, and supporting the transition of the market towards legal content consumption. And that's good for us, and that's good for anybody who believes in offering, a product that is grounded in, and at least making sure it's paid those who have invested and or extended their creative talent to creating things, right? And that's in our view fundamental. So our immediate focus is to continue doing that, to continue to provide the content that people want to see in the market, to continue to facilitate their ability to engage with that content and to pay for that content one way or another, and to continue to support that transition. And I think over time, what we will look to do inevitably, how we do it is to be seen, but what we'll look to do is to create more and more experiences around that content within our product so that people get more value out of it. And those experiences, are very emotional, and they relate to, their passion for the football game that they're watching, or their enjoyment or their sadness at that latest, series, particularly the ones that we're able to facilitate from that country and from that region, which really resonate emotionally with people. Our ability to create more experiences around that within our app, I think, is going to be key, because that in turn is, again, another element that piracy will never be able to replicate. But at the same time, it means that regardless of piracy, users are always going to get more value by consuming content legally, right? Not only do they get to watch it, they may get to engage with fellow fans about it. They may get to potentially acquire or even get more products associated with that content. I think all of these things are part of the natural evolution And part of the advantage of watching content digitally over what we used to do when it came to the analog alternatives, right? That's where I think there's a lot of potential. At the same time, we have much more flexibility as a smaller, faster, nimbler organization to explore, experiment, and implement some of these things, and perhaps some of the big incumbents, notwithstanding, obviously, they have a lot more money to be able to invest in it. It's just about, but these things are as much about having the resources as how efficiently you invest them. So yeah, I think that's where things are headed. The second question, remind me, Leander.
Sports specifically, I think.
Thank you. That was what I was reaching for. So sports, in my view, yes, we were opportunistic with sports to begin with. But ultimately, again, it's a content that infuses passion and emotions in users, and it's really, really important in the part of the world that we're operating in. So, we're already kind of firmly in that space through the LaLiga agreement. We evolved on that by acquiring the exclusivity to distribute beIN Sports streaming app, which obviously brings together a lot of the other exclusive sports content rights are available in the region. The Champions League, the Premier League are the two biggest amongst them. So we're going to continue evolving in that direction. But I think, kind of coming back to your question, where are we going kind of beyond all of this, or where are we taking this product that now includes sports and entertainment content, all sorts of things for Iraqis? Well, I think only time will tell, but I think that we have something that's quite unique, and I think that we've proven our ability to deliver it. So, there may well be other markets that could benefit from the solution that we're offering. And I think that there's perhaps some opportunities that will come up in the near term to do exactly that, to go somewhere else and to offer 1001 or something similar to 1001, because we do believe in locally branded products as well. Like, I think that's crucial. We don't believe in a one size fits all. And we think there's space for both, right? Don't get me wrong. There's space for Netflix to be in every market in the world. There's space for Shahid to be in every Arabic country in the world. But there's also space for, that local alternative in every one of the markets that these big regional or global giants operate in. And so I think there's going to be space for 1001, whether it's us or it's someone else, in pretty much every other market. And certainly I think we've developed some good sense and understanding of how to navigate many of the challenges that exist in an emerging market like Iraq, notwithstanding, I think, some of the more positive elements that I showcased on that market earlier. So, we will obviously look at those opportunities in future, but frankly, right now, our focus is on making sure that we support successfully the transition of the market that we're a core part of. And we hope to be able to accelerate that in the near future as well.
Amazing, thanks. Very, very clear as expected. I think very valuable for the audience. Great to have you. I have one question that our marketing team always pushes me to ask: is there a book, film, or a podcast that you would recommend that kind of inspired how you think, how you lead for the moment? That can be a short answer, but it's always a nice one to end with.
I've got a lot of ironically, especially in the last couple of years, I started consuming even more kind of TV series, movies. I probably don't read as much as I used to, and I should read a lot more. I think I've relied a lot more on audiobooks and podcasts, to be fair, but I think that's part of just the stresses of running a business and having a young family. You don't get that time to just sit on the beach and read calmly, right? So you kind of need
I hear you.
You need distractions, and sometimes video content is the best way to immerse yourself and lose yourself for a couple of hours. But there's a lot you can also pick up and learn from it. Ironically, I think probably one of the bits of content that I found most resonated with me in the last couple of years was the series on Netflix about the Spotify story. Like, there's so much for us to learn and take on board from what the good and the bad. I'm sure there's always a bit of both in everything, right? We don't see things as being black or white. Nothing's amazing, nothing's terrible. Like, there's lots of grays in these things. Spotify, I think, is a very interesting case. A lot of people didn't necessarily feel like they benefited from Spotify, but there was certainly a big culture shift in that industry on the back of Spotify. I don't think that can be denied. And I think the the Netflix series, whether or not it did justice to every element of that story, was a really enjoyable way of consuming, that story, what happened, and how they did what they did. And I think that's something that I think for those of us in this industry, I think is a very interesting thing to at least be aware of.
Yeah, I agree. I also enjoyed it. So cool. That's all for this episode of Le Corner. Thank you a lot, Mohsen. Thanks for the audience for listening. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, share it with someone who might find it interesting, or leave us a review. We also want to hear from you if you have feedback, guest ideas, or thoughts on what we should explore next. Just reach out via our website or social channels, and we will happily see you next time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lander. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. We hope you enjoy it as much as we love creating them. If you like the episode, feel free to comment, rate, and share with people around you. You can visit our website, www.lasource.io, to learn more about our activities. You will discover a wide range of articles and can subscribe to our newsletter to receive the latest tech and sports news in your mailbox every month. Stay tuned for new episodes.
Le Corner.